Thank you, Brother Omar. And at this time, I am going to turn to Ambassador Dale Weber to move the official welcome.
A pivotal moment for us to look at advancing our thought processes for youth engagement. Those of us with some here left will be making plans as to where we go. We'll be leaving a world not as good as we got it, and that has to be part of our mandate. We must ensure that we hand over to the next generation the opportunity to increase and do better. Young people bring new ideas, new innovation, new thought processes, new ways of doing things that we may never think of. They bring an activism and an inertia that we overcome by their presence. Youth-led organizations and youth-led initiatives build on education, build on artificial intelligence, build on their capacity to learn in a different way. As we meet, the call to action here is to work together to scale up financing, get our development partners all in the same direction, get public and private sector together. Ahead of COP30 in Belrm, this consultation, which we enhanced today, provides an opportunity for stakeholders to get involved, identify the top priorities so that we can select where we put our greatest effort. Also, to look at the challenges and how we can get past them. This COP coming up presents a unique opportunity to inspire unity in purpose. Brazil's rich history and global platform gives them an advantage which we are going to piggyback on. Environmental advocacy is at the key, and we need to work with them as hosts to get the best that we can get for ourselves. COP30 has the potential to ignite transformative agendas. Our mission is to determine what those agenda items should be, to prioritize them, learn from the past as we create a future. The difficulty here is time is not on our side. What we have to do, we must do now. What we have to do, only we can do. And we are here to all do it together. I welcome you to this consultation and ask that you engage, you participate, you put your views forward, and you ensure that your discussion or your thoughts are a part of whether a roundtable, a panel discussion, a question and answer, but the final analysis when we leave, we want to have a roadmap that takes Jamaica, Caribbean, and SIDS into Belrm in a much stronger position. I welcome you and look forward to today's and tomorrow's activities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for effectively painting the visual of the roadmap that is required to chart a regional and global resilient future. At this time, I am going to turn to Dr. Kishan Kode from the United Nations Development Program to move his opening remarks.
Well, good morning again, everyone. It's great to see everybody. Hope everybody's having a great morning. It should be a fun 2 days, important 2 days. So on behalf of United Nations Development Program, UNDP, it's really a pleasure to welcome everybody to this important discussion, important brainstorming, preparations for the big COP, the next big COP. We're happy and proud to be doing this in concert, of course, with the Ministry of Economic Growth, Job Creation, CCD in particular, but likewise, really great to have our friends from JSIF, from PIOJ, from the private sector, and other partners that are here today. So thanks for those opening remarks, Ambassador Weber. Look forward also to Honorable Minister Samuda and many others that are here today for this important discussion. So a challenging environment, not just in terms of the atmosphere and the ecosystems, but also in terms of the shifting landscape of cooperation, the challenge to multilateralism, the challenge to international cooperation. So it will be a very important and interesting and possibly challenging COP. COP29 was already challenging in terms of getting countries on the same page, as COPs always are. But the 5 years ahead of us are indeed an important 5 years as we go towards 2030 targets under the Paris Agreement, under the NDCs, of course, under the SDGs. And can we really keep accelerating progress? Can we sustain the progress that has been made to date? Can we prevent a reversal of development gains and even gains on climate action? So those are important questions, of course, that nobody has the answer to, but it's in our joint efforts that we can actually answer those questions, in the positive, and do our best to support communities as they struggle to continue to be resilient to climate impacts. Last year, I was really inspired to see the kind of resilience at the community level, last year being one of the unprecedented record climate-induced disasters in the Caribbean and elsewhere. And so we saw those communities in Jamaica, across the south coast of Jamaica, responding to that disaster, the earliest hurricane recorded ever to go towards, within 24 hours, 48 hours to go to a Category 4, and we saw the impacts. So is that the new normal? Have we crossed the threshold? Are these annual heat waves in this part of the world, is that the new normal? Again, questions, not propositions or answers from my side, but I think it's a serious challenge for us, for UNDP as the UN's development lead. Climate change equals poverty, equals inequality, vulnerability, fragility. So it's a development issue. How do we scale up climate action so that we can sustain and continue the hard gains countries have made on combating poverty and inequality? So we're really delighted to support this two-day consultation. We're really excited, and I think it's an important step to go towards NDC 3.0 at COP30 in Brazil. As the United Nations Development Program, the United Nations Secretary General Guterres has asked UNDP specifically to be the spearhead of the UN's efforts, bringing together the whole UN system, bringing together our sister agencies, UNEP, FAO, WHO, UNICEF, and everybody together. UNDP is the UN's largest implementer of grant assistance for climate action and for environmental protection. We have about $3-4 billion of grants today across the world, active in 140 countries. And so bringing together the whole weight of the United Nations systems to support their effort on NDC implementation. I think the NDC 3.0 will be critical in that regard to really highlight the emerging priorities in Jamaica, locally, for scaling up action. In Baku, of course, at COP29, the world recognized that climate financing is critical, and there were some huge gaps identified, of course, that remain as the needs grow, and unfortunately, the financing continues to be challenging. So that's why this event has such a big focus on the private sector role and gearing the market, bringing in some of our big global investment firms that we work with globally to scale up investments alongside our grants in the climate space. So we commend the Climate Change Division and the Ministry and others, PIOJ, JSIF, and many others that are engaging in this area. In alignment with our global mission and priorities of our country program, I'm here to reaffirm UNDP's support and partnership in catalyzing the kind of financing and partnerships that the ambassador rightly mentioned. And over the next 2 days, we hope that it'll lead to tangible and sustained action and set the stage for effective deliberations on the road to and during COP30. Best wishes for a great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kode, for reinforcing UNDP's crucial role in this national partnership and also for the critical reminder about the collaboration that we all need to advance our climate future. And at this time, I am going to invite back to the podium Ambassador Dale Weber to set the context for our next presentation.
Thank you once again, Mr. Wavy. And thank you, Kishan, for helping us view through your lens where we're going. And that's very important as partners. Speaking of partnerships, there are persons who have been working with us from the very beginning. Even before we had a climate change division or branch, there were persons who were contributing. Our next speaker is going to be Professor Michael Taylor. The minister has asked me to apologize. He is on his way, and we will have him speak after Professor Taylor makes his presentation. So Professor Taylor is no stranger to the climate world. He is, in my world, he is the Dean of the Faculty of Science and Technology at the University of the West Indies Mona campus. So he's my boss. Right, Michael? He says no. He is the co-director of the Climate Studies Group, which he inherited from Professor Chen, and talking about the baton passing, and now co-chairs with Professor Stevenson. So you see the continuity. And we actually had a function a couple of weeks ago, where the Climate Studies Group celebrated 30 years, 3 decades of that transitioning happening. So you ask, who is Professor Taylor and what does he do? Well, I could stand here all day telling you, but let me just give you the synopsis. He is the master of the data of the science of climate. To understand the mechanisms that drive climate vulnerability and variability in the Caribbean, you have to ask Professor Taylor. To understand the impact of climate change on the Caribbean and where you can find the databases that allow you to address the issues, you need to ask Professor Taylor. And when we had models that we were running on these little computers that took us 6 months, and we waited and waited and waited to see the result, only to realize that there was one error, we need to go back and run it again for another 6 months. It was Professor Taylor who decided he would put in that grant, which, by the way, if you ask Professor Taylor about grants, he will tell you, oh, they're small. They're only 13.4 million US and 20 million J and about 2 million euros. But one of those grants brought us our first supercomputer. And I say first because I'm going to try and help kickstart the second, since the first is almost obsolete, but still doing the trick. And that first computer made a 6-month run happen in 6 days. So you could actually predict with some element of time. He has given many distinguished lectures, and each time you hear him speak, you will want to hear him more. He has done over 15 international talks, both face-to-face, and every time you look for Michael, if he's not in the faculty office, he's in Geneva, he's in some other country, sharing the knowledge, because science drives decisions through data. In 2021, he was recognized as Apolitical's 100 most influential academics in government. BPA, the Blue Planet Alliance, they made him a fellow, and he's also a fellow of the World Academy of Sciences. 157 publications across a range of, not just in a journal that only he and I read, but in technical reports that inform government and decision makers, in books, in monographs, and also in the newspapers that you may read. The co-authoring of the Chapter 3 in the IPCC report, the special report on the 1.5, I don't know if he's as proud as I am of him, but for me that was a turning point as a document that would change not just Jamaica, not just the region, but the world. 1.5 to stay alive was born through this kind of science. He's a reviewer of many journals, Climate and Journal of Climate, Climate Dynamics, International Journal of Climatology, and he's also the preeminent scientist when it comes to connecting data to what we have to make our decisions about. Here to tell us a little about science and why it makes a difference and how we can use it, I ask you to welcome Professor Michael Taylor.
Let me adopt all protocols. Let me also say I used to think Ambassador Weber was my friend, but I'm not so sure anymore. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak, and thank you very much for allowing me to give this very quick presentation on science and what it means. I'm hoping the presentation will come up at any moment now. Great. So the title I've given to my presentation is Climate Change Science, Insights, Implication, and Meaning for SIDS, SIDS being Small Island Developing States. The truth is, I'm going to argue that there is no shortage of science information. Here is a plethora of things that are related to SIDS. So in the last IPCC cycle, 6 reports and 1 synthesis report, lots of science and a lot of it relevant to SIDS. We also have 3 State of the Jamaica Climate Reports, volumes, as well as 1 State of the Caribbean Climate Report. And then probably the most latest, okay, I'm hoping I'm controlling it, all right. And then probably the latest set of information we have are, I would say, these 10 reports. 5 vulnerability assessment reports for what done for the government of Jamaica on what they call 5 priority sectors: tourism, housing, health, water, and coastal, and 5 adaptation reports. I'm not sure why the presentation keeps going backwards. Maybe the technical people can help me. And then 5 adaptation reports looking on those same sectors. And those are available. So there is absolutely no shortage of some science data. The truth is, from all of these reports, we have lots of good science messages. So if we take the IPCC reports and the others, you have messages like this. Listen, the IPCC's last science assessment report says that when you take the decade from 2011 to 2020, we have zoomed past 1.1 degrees. And if we do nothing, we are heading for 2 degrees or more, depending on which scenario you think is likely to play out. What am I going to do? There's so much science and so many messages that it's impossible to give you all of them in this presentation. My suggestion, however, is that what we want to take away in a forum like this are the messages that you get when you read those reports through a SIDS lens. So what are the science messages that you get when you read those reports through a SIDS lens? I'm going to ask the technical team to help me why I don't know why I'm going backwards. And what do I mean by reading it through a SIDS lens? Reading it through a lens of islands that are small, isolated, and exposed. So islands like Jamaica that are in a hurricane belt and that are therefore small enough to be engulfed by a hurricane and where you have absolutely nowhere to run. Islands like Jamaica that are flat, low-lying, and mountainous. So you either live on a narrow coastal plain. Again, asking technical to help me. I'm not sure why we keep heading backwards. Right, that like a flat, so we either live on a coastal plain or a hilly interior. And that limits where life can occur, both being extremely climate sensitive. Read them through the lens of an island like Jamaica that is natural resource dependent, where we have an intimate relationship with oceans for things like fisheries, tourism, and shipping, or climate-sensitive economic or quality of life sectors, things like agriculture, tourism, water, energy, and health. Read it through the lens of an island like Jamaica, where we do outdoor living. Daily life is structured to take advantage of ambient conditions. Or put it all together, and I'm arguing, read it through the lens of extremely sensitive climate societies. That's what I'm asking you to do. Take the science and read it through that lens. When you read it through that lens, then some insights emerge. Some insights emerge with implications about how climate is changing the context in which SIDS life is occurring. And all I want to do for this presentation, I know he's coming to help me. Yeah, that's what I'm pressing. Okay. All right, I'm going to try to keep up with it. All I'm arguing is that when you read these science reports through a SIDS lens, then there are some insights which emerge about how climate is changing the context in which SIDS life is occurring. This quick presentation, I want to offer you 3 insights. I'm fighting with this technical team, fighting with this. All right. I want to offer you 3 insights from climate science when you read climate science through the SIDS lens, tell you 3 implications for SIDS life, and then what is the meaning of it all. So let's go quickly before it goes backwards. All right? So, 3 insights when you read climate science through a SIDS lens. I think when you begin to read climate science through a SIDS lens, the first insight you get is that climate change is introducing an era of multi-hazard unpredictability. Okay, all right. What do I mean? The truth is, this is what the science for SIDS is saying. First of all, it's saying that we're getting hotter. So here is a heat map, some of our latest science for Jamaica. And what is this heat map? Very simple. If you go from left to right, we're going from 1961 to 2021. If you go from top to bottom, we're going from January to December. And it's simply mapping out the mean temperature. What do you see? As you go from left to right, it gets darker and darker red. And temperatures for the Caribbean have been increasing. In the mean, we too have seen just over 1.1 degrees Celsius in the last century. But if you notice that by the time you reach the end of the right, the red occupies almost entirely the vertical. And it means we're having more hot days in a year and more hot nights. In fact, we have about 23 more hot days and hot nights by the science we are doing. And the warming is across land and ocean. So if by the time you reach the end of the year, the truth is summer is starting earlier and summer is lasting longer. But that's not the only thing. Our rain is way more variable. So if you look on Caribbean rainfall, which is the easiest one to plot, you will see that the line just goes up and then it goes down and then it goes up and then it goes down. And you see that there is way more variability in the Caribbean pattern of rainfall. But it's beyond that, though. It's also how the rain is falling that's changing. And so if you plot what we call an intense rainfall index, you notice all of those triangles are red and up. So it's significant and they are up, which means how rain falls is changing. We get these dry patterns of rain, and then when rain falls, it falls. I'm checking that you're still with me. So we're seeing this, that we're seeing both hotter, more warm spells, and we're seeing more variable rainfall. We're seeing more extremes. And whether you define extremes as drought, which is the left, we have seen 2 major region-wide droughts in the last decade, multi-year droughts. Those droughts being 2009-10 and 2013-16. We have seen other national droughts, but 2 region-wide droughts. And the number of intense hurricanes are steadily going up. And then quickly, we are seeing higher sea levels. Best way to illustrate it, Hellshire on the top in 2006, Hellshire on the bottom in 2020. What you notice is missing in between the 2 diagrams. All of the beach, right? But what is this science showing? Well, first of all, it's showing that if you take in the long term, our sea levels have been rising at about 1.7 millimeters per year. If you take post-1993, that doubles to 3.5 millimeters per year. And in the latest research we have done, if you take post-2004, that should be, not 2014, 2004, that's all right. We are going at 6.15 millimeters per year, a further doubling. Our Caribbean sea levels are rising at 67% faster than the most recent estimates of global sea levels. Put that all together, what is the science saying? We are entering an era of multi-hazard unpredictability. More heat waves, higher frequency droughts, heavy rainfall, more intense hurricanes, higher sea levels, and of course the accompanying storm surge. It's multi-hazard because it's not one or the other. And it's unpredictable because you never know which one is coming next. The truth is, multi-hazard is the new Caribbean reality. So if you plot all of the natural disasters for the Caribbean from the MDAT database, from 2000 to 2023, there are about 700 of them, not all of them climate related, but 600 of them are climate related. And you can see the cost. And then if you look on how vulnerable we are with respect to the rest of the world, 7 times more vulnerable than other states in terms of disaster frequency, and with 6 times more damage. The science tells us clearly, we are in an era of multi-hazard unpredictability. Before I leave the point quickly, how could I get this across to you for Jamaica, that Jamaica is living in this era? Well, my argument is, if we're living in this new multi-hazard, this new Caribbean reality of multi-hazard, it's changing the context within which life occurs. So it's changing the context within which SIDS life is occurring. What is the new context for life? It is a context of more unplanned disruptions. How do I illustrate this? Let me take 2023. In Jamaica, we began the year in March in drought. And so you saw that the fact that we were in drought, and we needed an additional 100 million more for drought response. By the time you hit July, we were doing heatflation. And though they didn't cost out heat, and that's a little thing I want to point out, that we need to begin to cost out what heat is doing. It's the new hazard. We knew it was increasing the prices of food. And then we ended the year not with a cyclone, but a potential tropical cyclone that brought $409 million in damage, including $274 million for the agricultural sector. Can you see the multi-hazard in 1 year in Jamaica? And why is this at all important? The fact that we have more unplanned disruptions. You really see it when you take the table of impacts produced by the PIOJ. So the PIOJ has produced this table, and I have been trying to update it. And all it's saying is, if I go from 2000 to present, and I look at the major event that has hit us, what has been the cost and what has been the GDP cost? If I start in 2000 with a drought, 0.2% of GDP. Hurricane Michelle, 0.7% in 2002. We skipped 2003, but then in 2004, Charlie and Ivan made up for it. So that's 0.1 and 6.8%. And go down the list. 5, 7, 8, 10, 12, 17. And again, I'm making the point that we need to start calculating heat, because 2023 was a record heat year for us, and we don't have that cost. But then you add Beryl down there. The clear pattern is our development trajectory is consistently being interrupted. And that's what happens when the science tells us we are in an era of multi-hazard unpredictability. So, my first insight, if you take climate science and read it through the lens of SIDS, the clear insight is that climate is introducing an era of multi-hazard unpredictability. What does that mean? We are changing the context in which SIDS life occurs. We are living life now in a context of increasingly more unplanned disruptions, or a context of development interrupted. Very quickly, what else do we get when we read science through the lens of a SIDS? Well, the second thing is, yes, when you read climate science through the lens of SIDS, you do see that it's saying that we're entering an era of multi-hazard unpredictability, but you also see that it says we're entering an era of multi-sector undermining. And let me quickly explain. All I have shown you so far is how the climate has changed. The climate will continue to change. What does the science of climate change for the Caribbean look like? It looks like even hotter days ahead. So we have seen the 1 degree, we're heading to 3 to 4 degrees by the end of the century. Depends on which scenario. So the top diagram is the worst case, the not so good case, and the bottom one is a better case. And it doesn't matter the case you take, we are hot. Up to 30 to 98% of days will be hot, so that heat map will be just straight across the vertical, and only 2% cool. What else will happen? We're heading for even drier conditions. That's the equivalent rainfall map for the Caribbean. And what you can see is that as you go from the past, going into when we hit 1.5 warming, 2, 3, 4, all you happen to do is get drier. All right? We never lose the variability, but we vary around a lower mean. And by the end of the century, for some of the countries, we're about 30% drier with a shorter rainfall season. What happens to those extremes, more intense extremes? The table on the left, if you just look at the total column, it's the amount of time during that decade that we will be in either moderate, extreme, or severe drought. By the 2030s, 17% of the time. By 2060s, 26% of the time. By 2090s, 34% of the time, based on the research we are doing. And then, of course, what will happen to those hurricanes? Not necessarily that we'll get more. Those are the model category 4 and 5 tracks, but we'll get stronger hurricanes. So when they come, they will become intense. And lastly, what about those sea level rise? Instead of the millimeters per year that we are seeing, we'll be up to 1 meter by the century's end. What is the point I'm making? If you look on the changes to come versus the changes that have already happened, the changes to come far exceed anything we have lived through already. That's the definition of unprecedented. Unprecedented is when what is to happen goes beyond anything you have lived through already. So the climate is going to continue to change, and we're going to go into unprecedented. Truth is, we already know unprecedented. We have lived unprecedented. We lived it in 2017 when we had 3 Category 5 come through the Caribbean in one season. We lived it in 2019 when Hurricane Dorian was a superstorm and sat over Bahamas. We lived it in 2020 when we exhausted the alphabet in naming our storms, and we had to start naming them Alpha, Beta, Gamma, Delta. And we lived it in 2024 when we had unprecedented burial in terms of the time of the year that it came. What's the problem with unprecedented? Unprecedented climate means unprecedented impacts. Where am I going with this? Simple. When you have unprecedented impacts, you undermine every sector of Caribbean life because there is no preparation for the unprecedented. Trying to see how I could illustrate this. So I've been on a task over the recent years to collect newspaper headlines related to climate. Here is my collection of the last 3 years. And I couldn't put everything up there. See if it doesn't make the point that we are now climate is undermining every sector of Caribbean life. Start at the top, it's changing electricity demand. That was during 2023 when JPS had unprecedented demand. Then it's heat stress for farmers, and that's for their livestock. Go across, costly waste, heavy rains leave deplorable roads in deplorable states. Come down, these classrooms are furnaces. That's education and climate change impacting it. Water. Jamaican higglers feeling the heat, and that's particularly important because climate change is creating new classes of vulnerable persons. And when higglers in markets begin to feel the heat, that is significant and undermining of livelihoods. Dire warnings for coral reef, that's biodiversity. Beloved beaches succumbing, that's your relaxation and then drought-hurting agriculture, that's food security. And then the headline I like all is that one in the middle at the bottom, rain just mash up everything. And you get the idea that what happens when you get to unprecedented is that you begin to undermine every sector of Caribbean life. Or put another way, climate is changing the context in which SIDS life occurs. We are now living in a context of unreliable determinants of quality of life. Water can't deliver as it should. Agriculture can't deliver as it should. The livelihood sectors can't deliver as they should. And it is not that we're not doing things, we just can't keep up with the pace of the change right now. So, where do we see this most? We see it in the impact on our development goals. If you think of everything that I just put up there, which is science supports, climate change is saying, which of these goals will be impacted? Just about everyone. The hunger, that's the food. The health, that's partly with the water. Quality education, and I don't need to go through. But these are the goals that are in our development plans. And so what I am arguing is a simple argument. When you look on the science and you read it through the lens of acids, yes, it says that we're entering an era of multi-hazard unpredictability, which means that context for life is changing. We're living in a context of increasingly more unplanned disruptions and development is interrupted. But it also says we're living in an era of multi-sector undermining, or the context of increasingly more unreliable determinants, and the development we are striving for is being delayed. That's what the science is suggesting. One more quickly. Lastly, when you read the science through the lens of acids, yes, it's saying we're entering an era of multi-hazard unpredictability. Yes, it's saying we're entering an era of multi-sector undermining. But it's also saying we're entering an era of multiplied urgency. The IPCC just makes it, they sum it up in their summation. Urgent climate action can secure a livable future. Yes, a livable future is possible. We need urgent action. Love this quote from PM Motley. We have seen some changes. We have seen some initiatives taken. But the problem is that the temperatures are moving faster than we are making changes. And if that is the case, we have a bigger problem than we anticipated. The truth is, you heard it in Ambassador Weber's opening remarks. We premised Caribbean climate science around 1.5 degrees. We argued and championed 1.5 degrees. And we did it because we said, and in doing so, we said 1.5 to stay alive. And it's not that 1.5 was going to be a safe target for the Caribbean. This is our research that shows what 1.5 means for the Caribbean. 40% less hydropower in Suriname, diminished agricultural productivity in Jamaica, regional cost of damage is 2 to 3 times higher, 4% increase in aridity, and inundation of coastal infrastructure. Well, when we did this research, the idea was that 1.5 at our current rate of emissions would be achieved towards the end of this decade, to 2030s, to middle of the next decade, 2035, if we did nothing as a world. What we have seen is that last year was the first year we broached 1.5 as a world. The truth is 2023, we were very close, and we often talk about 2023 as a first year, but we were about 1.48 degrees. But last year, we don't even have to round up anymore. We broached it, and we were closer to 1.6 degrees as a world. Does it mean we have exceeded 1.5? No, because we have to do this on a consistent basis. But it means for the first time, earlier than we expected, we are broaching the 1.5 degree mark. It suggests that the science is saying we are entering an era of multiplied urgency, greater urgency. Why is this important? It therefore means that all of those development options we put on the table for what we need to be doing when we reach 1.5 are no longer options. They are now demands. It therefore means that the context in which we are living is different. We are now living in a context of more unavoidable decisions that have to be taken now. Decisions about what? You know them. I don't need to go through them. Decisions about adaptation. And adaptation has to be across all sectors, because I've already showed you that it's a multi-sector undermining. Has to be decisions about mitigation. The diagram is saying that's where we are in terms of our emissions. That's where we are in terms of our NDCs, and we need to bridge the gap to bring them back down if we're keeping 1.5 on the table. For the Caribbean, that means decisions about things like oceans, land use, waste, energy, transportation. Those are our areas, and I'm sure you will see many of them reflected in the updated NDCs. Those are the decisions we have to take now. It's clearly decisions, and I have to throw this one in because I'm from the University of the West Indies. Please forgive me. Has to be decisions about research. The truth is, I do climate science, but research is needed in so many other areas. Data collection, research about what innovation and technology is needed to match our reality. Research about early warning and risk monitoring and emergency preparedness. Research about what are the appropriate sustainable technologies. Research that supports advocacy. If climate litigation, justice, and loss and damage is coming on the table, detection and attribution has to be researched, and we can't leave it for somebody else to do. New models of governance in all areas, and research that looks about priorities, co-benefits, and trade-offs. We need some urgent decisions about research. We need urgent decisions about education. All the things we talk about, mainstreaming education, putting it in curricula, texts, workshops, getting indigenous knowledge represented. We need those decisions now. We need decisions about collaboration, and you heard it, we need decisions about finance. I'm ending. Why do we need these decisions? Because that's the pathway to resilience, and we're glad to see some of those decisions represented in the room today. Climate resilience integrates decisions across all of these areas. That is the importance of us being in the room. That's what the science says. So I'm ending. I've been asked to talk about climate science, and I'm saying I could tell you a lot from the IPCC reports, but read climate science through the lens of SIDS. When you read it through the lens of SIDS, 3 insights jump out. 1, we're entering an era of multi-hazard unpredictability. It means that the context for SIDS life is changing. We are now living in a context of increasingly more unplanned disruptions, or development trajectories continuously being interrupted. The second insight, we're entering an era of multi-sector undermining. It means the context is changing. We're now living in a context where the determinants of quality of life are unreliable in their present form, and we need to change that. Or development delayed. And last one, it means we're in an era of multiplied urgency. It means we're living in a new context where we have to make some unavoidable decisions more and more. And I told you, so development is demanded. But if we make those decisions, then we have a resilient future. So that's what the science is saying in terms of insights. That's what the science is saying in terms of implications. I was asked to say, what does it all mean? These are my takeaways. When we move into an era of unplanned disruptions, then it means ignorance is no longer an option. We can't just pretend like climate change is not happening. No longer an option. When we move into a new context of increasingly more unreliable determinants, it means individualism is no longer an option. We can't tackle climate change by tackling one sector or government versus private sector. Everybody has to play that role. And then when we move into an era of increasingly more unavoidable decisions, it means inaction is no longer an option. And that's what the science means. Thank you.
I think that applause was way too short for the kind of detail that. Absolutely. I think I speak for everyone in this room, no matter how many times, for those who may have heard Prof speak to any kind of presentation on climate change. It's always something that's engrossing, not just because of the severity of our time, but just the kind of forensic analysis and breakdown that we need. Science is the backbone of climate action. And so we're really grateful for the continued insights as we understand the challenges, as we track the progress, and as we design solutions that are robust, that can, I don't know if it's going to be solved, but certainly address these critical development challenges, and as we proceed into more unprecedented times. Now, in the interest of time, we are going to accommodate 2 questions before we proceed to the minister's intervention. I don't know if we have any pressing comments or questions that may have emerged from Professor's presentation. Okay, if not, we'll just move on to the next agenda item. So at this time, we will invite the Honorable Minister Matthew Samuda, Minister without portfolio within the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation.
Good morning, all. Allow me to acknowledge Ambassador and Special Envoy for Sustainability, Professor Dr. Kishant Agencies, for being able to well with crowd.